Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is the Daily Score. We are now 72 hours into the siege of our republic from the Biden regime. We went over a few of the damaging executive orders in our first episode, and well, we're going to do the same here. Today we're going to be discussing Biden's executive order to rescind the banning of the Chinese in the U.S. power grid. Yes, folks, I'm not kidding. Biden has just now allowed the Chinese Communist Party back into the United States power grid. We're also going to take a look at why a $15 minimum wage may sound absolutely fantastic when you first hear about it, but is absolutely detrimental in the long run. He started out first with a $15 federal minimum wage, but now he wants to push this through to the entire country. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how Biden completely overturned President Trump's efforts to get us lower drug prices. And as we're going to hear later on, it's because Big Pharma likes to pay off politicians. All this and more coming up. Well, let's take a look at why President Trump originally, on May 1st of 2020, secured our United States power system. President Trump had this to say in his executive order: I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, find that foreign adversaries are increasingly creating and exploiting vulnerabilities in the United States bulk power system, which provides the electricity that supports our national defense, vital emergency services, critical infrastructure, economy, and our way of life. The bulk power system is a target of those seeking to commit malicious acts against the United States and its people, including malicious cyber activities, because a successful attack on our bulk power system would present significant risks to our economy, human health, and safety, and would render the United States less capable of acting in self-defense of itself or its allies. I further find that unrestricted acquisition or use of the United States bulk power system electrical equipment designed and developed, manufactured, or supplied by persons owned by or controlled by or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of foreign adversaries augments the ability of foreign adversaries to create and exploit vulnerabilities in bulk power system electric equipment with potentially catastrophic effects. I therefore determine that the unrestricted foreign supply of bulk power systems electrical equipment constitutes the unusual and extraordinary threat to our national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, which has its source in whole or in substantial part outside of the United States. This threat exists both in the case of individual acquisitions and when acquisitions are considered as a class. Although maintaining an open investment climate in bulk power systems, electric equipment, and in the United States economy more generally is important for the overall growth and prosperity of the United States, such openness must be balanced with the need to protect our nation against a critical national security threat. To address this threat, additional steps are required to protect the security, integrity, and reliability of bulk power system electric equipment use in the United States. In light of these findings, I hereby declare a national emergency with respect to the threat of the United States bulk power system. Now, what is that entire long-winded explanation actually saying here? Well, in short, it's saying this. It's saying that the United States relies too heavily on other nations for both power and its equipment used in the power grid itself. President Trump not only moved the manufacturing of these critical infrastructure parts back to the United States from communist China, but said that the United States is going to be energy independent from China in all respects. Now, Joe Biden has just rescinded this executive order from President Donald Trump. This was designed to prevent foreign countries from meddling with the U.S. power grid. President Trump's order specifically prohibited any acquisition, importation, transfer, or installation of bulk power systems, BPS, electrical equipment by foreign adversaries. This was part of his own executive order on protecting public health and the environment and restoring science, tackling the climate crisis. I mean, this is a legitimate question here. Does Joe Biden actually have the United States of America and the American people's interests before those of China? I mean, you're talking for the critical infrastructure. The BPS provides the electricity for national defense, vital emergency services, and critical infrastructure, our economy, and our way of life. And that foreign actors, namely China, were increasingly creating and exploiting vulnerabilities. These are quotes. President Trump removed this risk to us, removed the risk to the United States of America from the Chinese Communist Party by not allowing them into our electrical grid. Joe Biden has now left a gaping hole in our critical national defense by allowing China to export critical substandard Chinese components that may give them direct access to our power grid. Folks, I'm not making this stuff up. This was in the original executive order from President Trump on May 1st of 2020. Next up from the Biden regime, we have an executive order that restores some collective bargaining rights to federal government employees. Biden has also paved the way for a $15 minimum wage for federal workers, according to The Hill. In addition, he also reiterated his commitment to establishing a $15 national minimum wage. While I'm not going to get into the collective bargaining rights on this episode, we can make a whole nother episode later on about this alone. I am, however, going to get into the whole $15 an hour minimum wage nightmare that he wants to push on the entire nation. We're going to take a look at this from two perspectives. One on the part of the employee and the next on the part of the business. You have the employee who is ecstatic because he or she is now going to be making $15 an hour, and that super rich owner is just going to have to cough up more money for me to work there, right? It's okay because he's filthy rich. No, that's not how it works at all, in fact. And quite honestly, you really can't fault the employee for thinking this, as he or she probably has absolutely no idea what goes into running a business. So for an easy example, we're going to use a simple brick-and-mortar store. As a side note, the basics in business ownership should really be required teaching in high school. Owning and running a business is not limited to, but definitely includes the following expenses. You have your building rent or your ownership costs. You have your utility expenses, which is electricity, water, sewage. Whether it's hot or cold outside, depending on the seasons, you're going to have heating or cooling. And I know that goes under electricity, but each one of those seasons, they drastically can drive up your heating and cooling bill. You have insurances, you have equipment maintenance, you have the product itself, you have the employees, you have permits and licensing, you have employee benefits, you have your time. Your time as an employer is the most valuable asset you have, because when running a business, time is quite literally your money. You have credit card fees, and the list can go on and on. Now, once you've added all these up, they can be astronomically expensive. After the employer gets done paying his or her own bills, who do you think gets paid next? It's not himself or herself, it's the employees. The employees get paid next, and once they're paid, the employer gets the leftovers. Now, it could be more, or it can be less than what you as the employee just walked away with, depending on the sales. That business owner has assumed all of the risk in owning a business, hoping to reap a reward. If you force the owner to have a minimum wage 50 to 80% higher than what he or she can afford, they are left with a decision. Number one, the employer can take a pay cut and add his or her own former wage to yours. 2, he or she could simply fire a couple employees, leaving you jobless to make up for the losses. Or number 3, they might have to close their doors because it's simply not worth it to keep the doors open, because the business is operating on a razor-thin margin as it is. Just because someone owns a business doesn't mean that they're rich. In fact, the majority of small businesses, the mom and pop shops, do just enough to provide for themselves for a living. It's not their job to provide you with a living wage. A $15 minimum wage will absolutely destroy small businesses, just as we saw with the Democrat policies of the Democrat governors destroying small businesses by closing everything but the big box stores for COVID. Also, the idea that a $15 minimum wage will bring people out of poverty is entirely 100% fallacious. What it does do is give people a false sense of security, thinking that they're making more money than they were before, when in the long term they're actually making less money because the prices of goods and services go up exponentially to make up for the increased wage that's now being forced upon employers. What people don't realize is that the value of the fiat currency printed by the private Federal Reserve Bank also goes down with each piece of paper printed. The Congressional Budget Office even said that there was a minimum of 1.3 million, upwards of 4 million and beyond, that would lose their jobs due to a minimum wage hike of $15. We are now 72 hours into this man's presidency, and he is already proposing to cut millions of jobs under the guise of fairness and equity. And last but not least, let's talk about how Biden completely, totally, utterly, and thoroughly is in the back pockets of the pharmaceutical companies. For those of you who don't know, President Trump signed an executive order that would ultimately bring down the cost of pharmaceuticals like insulin and epinephrine in the United States. Well, guess who just completely destroyed that initiative? Yep, you got it right, good old Uncle Joe. Now, before this was derailed by someone who apparently cares nothing for the American people, let's look at what President Trump's executive order actually did for the people. Alright, in past years, people were up in arms, and rightly so, about the cost of insulin and epinephrine, as they are an absolute necessity for someone who actually needs them. In fact, these two drugs mean literally life and death for those who have to use them. For decades, the pharmaceutical companies have massively capitalized on these life-saving drugs to insane proportions because they are quite literally a necessity to so many American lives. Why cure an ailment when you can manage it and get filthy rich in the process? President Trump, the president that our media did absolutely everything that they could to completely obliterate with lies and disinformation, brought down these costs by matching them with costs of those in developing nations. If a developing nation can make a healthy profit off of these drugs with their production, these pharmaceutical companies certainly can by matching the prices of lesser developed nations, especially with the modern technology that's available in the United States. This we're going to have to backtrack just a tad to see why Big Pharma hated Trump so much. Well, you see, what Trump did was implement the most favored nation law. What it does is it seeks to lower the prices of Medicare by linking them to the cost of certain medicines to cheaper prices in other developed countries. People often complain of buying the same drug in the United States when the price in Canada and Mexico are far cheaper. Now, obviously, the pharmaceutical industry strongly opposed this measure, arguing that it would bring foreign price controls into the United States healthcare system and limit access. Groups including the Association of Community Cancer Centers and the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America sued to block this rule. In December of 2020, the United States District Judge Catherine Blake issued a nationwide injunction on Trump's most favored nation drug pricing rule that would tie Medicare Part B drug prices to those paid in other countries starting January 1st of 2020. The Trump administration also removed the gag clauses that prevented pharmacists from telling patients how to buy less expensive drugs, as Big Pharma actually had a gag order in place. Seema Verma, the former U.S. Administrator, Centers for Medicine and Medicaid Services, wrote an op-ed piece in October of 2020. This year, President Trump struck a deal known as the Part D Senior Savings Model with pharmaceutical manufacturers in plans that will provide many Medicare beneficiaries access to a broad set of insulins at a maximum $35 copay for a month's prescription. We are encouraging beneficiaries to see if a participating plan that includes their insulin is right for them during Medicare open enrollment, which begins October 15th. Now, this initiative could save the over 1.3 million seniors who rely on Medicare Part D plans and use insulin an average of $446 or 66% a year on their insulin costs. Now, for those whose health and even lives depend on insulin, the savings could be nothing short of a godsend. And just to show you how pharmaceutical companies are alive and well in our political process, in the 2020 election, Eli Lilly, the largest maker of insulin in the United States, gave $138,880 to Joe Biden and absolutely nothing to Donald Trump. But Senator Mitch McConnell got about $48,493, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. This just goes to show that our political leaders who are supposed to put the Americans first actually put the corporations first as long as they get big enough payouts. Joe Biden has clearly done this here by putting those Americans in need last. You know, at this point, if you're one of the 68 million Americans who actually voted for this monster, you have absolutely no one but yourself to blame. With clear-sighted evidence, President Trump was the only person here that actually put the American people first. What President Trump did with his executive order was end the system of kickbacks by middlemen that are behind the high out-of-pocket expenses that many Americans face at the pharmacy counter. He actually required the qualified health centers who purchase insulins and epinephrine to pass the savings from discounted drug prices directly onto the patients. This would increase access to life-saving insulin and epinephrine for patients who face especially high costs. Among the 28 million patients who visit FQHCs every year, over 6 million of whom are uninsured. To make things even better, he finalized a rule allowing states to develop safe importation plans for certain prescription drugs. He authorized the re-importation of insulin products made in the United States if the Secretary finds re-importation is required for emergency medical care. He created individual waivers to purchase drugs at a lower cost from pre-authorized U.S. pharmacies, and he took executive action to see that the most costly drugs were reduced in price. When will the United States take their collective heads out of the sand and actually look into who's working for the people? I mean, it doesn't take a genius thus far to see who was doing that. Thank you for listening today. Please like, share, and subscribe, as I am a new channel and I'd really like to continue this. If there's any topics that you would like featured, please mention them in the comments below. This is America's Republic Under Siege. Thank you and take care.